I started realizing, okay, I need to have a legacy. I got to have something that I want to leave behind. And I realized that I wanted to create a podcast where I'm talking to people who, have a similar background, who don't have that type of experience. What about you?
My legacy are my children.
Like, you didn't have to try to one-up me.
I one-upped you.
I
knew that would make you feel that way.
I knew you was going to do that.
I knew that would make you feel bad. Yeah.
Why are you like this?
Have you heard of the Healthy Conversations podcast? If you're looking for a podcast that moves the health conversation forward, then I highly recommend Healthy Conversations, the acclaimed podcast from CVS Health. Hosted by Dr. Daniel Kraft, the Harvard and Stanford-trained physician scientist, Healthy Conversations provides both inspiration and cutting-edge information about the forefront of medical practice. You can find it wherever you're listening to Docs Outside the Box, and don't forget to subscribe. And to make it easier, the link is in the show notes. All right, what's good, everyone? Welcome to Docs Outside the Box, a special episode of Docs Outside the Box. I am your host, Dr. Nee. As always, I am joined by
Dr. Renee.
So listen, folks, the reason I say this is a special episode is because, a lot of times, we talk at patients or we talk directly to people and we just tell stories without really offering any type of context. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes, we don't let people know that there's a lot of lessons that you can learn in life just by listening to our story of life.
Right.
Okay. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about the dangers, the implications through our own story of how we handled or how you guys should be thinking about student loan debt, knowing your salary, and then ultimately how that plays into being very intentional about your career.
Absolutely.
And I know sometimes you guys may hear, well, what does that mean, being intentional about my career? Like, I'm studying and I'm going to graduate. Like, I'm going towards the intention of getting my career.
Yeah.
What I mean by being intentional about your career is like thinking about and understanding, like, how long do you want to practice, right? Like, as soon as you graduate, what is the finish line for you? Is it in your 50s, your 60s? Is it in your 40s?
And
right?
What does that mean monetarily for you?
Absolutely.
She said money.
Don't be scared about that, right? That's not a scary thing, y'all. It is not a scary thing. But the other thing that we want you to think about in terms of intentionality is, how do you want to practice?
Right.
Right? How do you want to practice? Does that mean that when you finish and you start working, that are you going to work basically Monday through Friday or Monday through Monday? And you're going to do that for 4 weeks straight and maybe have a couple of days off and then rinse, wash, and repeat and then, have 4 to 6 weeks off and then that's it? Or does that mean that maybe you spend 6 weeks working? Who wants to work 6 weeks for the entire year? That would go, right? But six months working, right? And then the other 6 months, you're in another country doing something, right? Doing some medical mission work. We've talked to people who do that. We talk to people who maybe have a career where they're working in working for a certain period of time, and then maybe they're a medical correspondent for a news channel. So there's so many different ways that you can think about your career in terms of how long you want to practice and how you want to practice. But the most important thing that we also want you guys to also understand from our experience is to not be defined purely by your career.
Right.
It's very important to understand that. Your self-worth, your value, how you look at yourself, the reflection that you see in the mirror does not have to do 100% equate with who you are with your career or where you are in your career.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, with that said, before we jump into this,
who are these people?
Into this tomfoolery, we don't like to be this serious, guys. So before we get into this tomfoolery, we want to give a shout out to folks who are watching us, specifically to folks from Rosalind Franklin University of Medicine and Science. And now I got to say this name right because this is a long name for a class. The Foundations for Interprofessional Practice. Shout out to all of y'all who are here watching this. Give yourself a pat on the back. This is a great course. This is a great class. I wish something like this existed when we were in medical school.
Absolutely.
For me, about 20 years ago. For you, about 30 years ago.
Get out of here, Nee. We went to school at the same time.
Did we really?
Yes, we did.
I don't know. You are older than me, though.
Anyway, Nee, and I want to give a shout out to the people in the Rhodes viewing party. That's right.
Yeah, tip off your sandwiches or whatever you're eating right now.
Clink, clink.
Clink, clink, because we're hungry, actually. So
That's right. That's right.
Why don't we start with who we are, okay?
Absolutely.
So I introduced myself as the host, Dr. Nee. My name is Dr. Nee Dako Darko. That's my full name. My family's from Ghana, hence the name Dr. Nee. I'm a trauma surgeon. And let's take it all the way to the beginning. I wanted to be a doctor based off of me watching a lot of TV in the 80s. I grew up in New York City. So I grew up in a time when Denzel Washington was a doctor. I also grew up when Doogie Howser was on TV. And there wasn't anybody in my family who was a doctor. There wasn't anybody in my family who was in any parts of medicine, nursing, nothing.
Right.
And I just was watching TV and I was like, that's pretty dope. I like that.
Yeah.
I think I could do that. Or I think I want to do that.
Right.
Not knowing anything about the background of what it takes to become a doctor, the medical school and all that. I just knew you go to school and then you become a doctor and then you be on TV.
You go to school for a long time. Yeah.
But why I'm here, why I'm talking to you is mainly because it's the reason why I started the podcast, which is I think right around like my 4th year of residency, I started to realize, well, now that I'm getting towards the end of my residency and I'm going to be practicing on my own, how exactly do I want to practice? What exactly do I want to be known for? And it was very clear at that point that I was like, you know what, Renee, like, I don't know if I'm going to be known for like creating a Darko technique, right? Like that's not going to happen.
Surgical technique.
Yeah, I'm not going to discover any type of thing. I'm not going to be doing any type of research or anything like that. That's just not where I was at.
Right.
And then as you go, or for me, a couple more years into my training or even done after that, I started realizing, okay, I need to have a legacy. Like I got to have something that I want to leave behind. And for me, I made a lot of mistakes along the way in terms of either standing up for myself, making bad decisions with my finances. I was a horrible saver. I had a ton of student loan debt. I just felt like I was lacking in the soft skills. Right. What we call the soft skills. How do you communicate with people? How do you stand up for yourself? Right. How do you deal with, hierarchy and so forth? And I realized that I wanted to create a podcast where I'm talking to people who, have a similar background, who don't have that type of experience. And that's where I come from. That's what I think about whenever I'm creating a show. That's what I bring when I'm coming here and talking to y'all. What about you?
So for me, my name is Renee Volney Darko. Volney is my maiden name. And married this guy after about 10 years of dating. We went to medical school.
9 years. 9 years, exactly.
Anyway, it was 10 years. We got married in 2013. See that? You see how he's starting already? Anyway, we met in medical school. I became an OBGYN. And so that's kind of what I do for, in medicine at this point in time. As far as my kind of journey to medicine, I think I was similar to you. I saw what doctors did and I thought, I'd like to do that. I think that would be fun. Yeah. Didn't really think much about how much it would cost to do that. So going into college, going into medical school, you signing on the dotted line that you're going to pay all this money. And for me, I was like, yeah, as long as it gives me access to my education, I'm cool. But
sign in blood.
Yeah, signing in blood. Now, I wasn't necessarily a big spender, but I wasn't a great saver either. And I didn't really know about managing money. And for those of you who are in the class right now, let me tell you, you probably have heard time and time again that you probably shouldn't talk about money because, if you talk about money, you shouldn't go into medicine for money. Well, I didn't go into medicine for money, but I ain't going to medicine to be broke. So, there's a difference, right? So I think this is why we're talking with you today, because somebody finally has to put the money card on the table. And that's what we're here to do with you today.
No legacy thing for you? No legacy move?
My legacy? No. I got to think about that. Yeah. My legacy are my children. That's my legacy.
Well, you didn't have to try to one-up me.
I one-upped you.
And make me think that I'm not thinking about my kids.
Way.
I knew you was going to do that.
I knew that would make you feel bad. Yeah.
Why are you like this?
Guys, we really are like this. Truly. We are really like this. So pray for us. Hold up. Before we continue, to all my day ones, and each and every one of you who you are, thank you for rolling with the show from jump. And to the new listeners, welcome. What's good? Where y'all been? I want y'all to stay a while. All right. So look, I'm trying to build a community here and I need your help. So with whatever app you're listening to this show right now, I want you to click the subscribe button. Then I want you to go over to Apple Podcasts and I want you to rate and review the show. And you may be asking, how does this help? The way how it helps is by helping the show to grow and rise up in the rankings so that it's easier for new people to discover the show. Now, what's in it for you is at least once a week, I'm going to be going through these reviews. I'm going to pick a lucky reviewer, and I'm going to give that person an opportunity to have a 15-minute session with me where we could talk about anything from personal finance, getting your money right, to just shooting the you-know-what about the show. So listen, remember, all I need you to do is subscribe and then rate and review this show on Apple Podcasts. Let's get on with the episode. Peace. So let's get back to you guys, the people who are listening.
Yeah.
So look, from the way how I understand this class, you guys come from so many different backgrounds. Some of you guys are going to be in different aspects of healthcare. And as a result, like there's just like the intricacies of what goes on into your specific career. We can't really talk to the specific intricacies of each and every one of your career trajectories.
Right.
But I'm willing to bet that the majority of you all watching right now or listening have probably used student loans to get through your education, whether it's undergrad or even right now at Rosalind Franklin University,
Yeah.
right? Unless your name is, or your last name is Franklin, or you're related to the Rosalind Franklin, or somebody else who can, pay cash money to get you to school.
Right.
I'm assuming the majority of you all are taking out student loans.
I'm looking at the chat, and you guys are hilarious.
What they saying?
No, they're like, yes, sir. They're putting up the laugh emoji
Mostly
and
they're
you're
laughing
and
at
already
me.
on it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Mainly they love me, right?
Nobody wrote that they love you.
Okay.
Proceed.
Well, what I'm getting to, guys, is that, listen, I know that the majority of you all are taking loans, and the majority of the United States, if they're students, they're taking out loans. Loans are a big deal, right? Loans at this point right now, we're getting close to a $2 trillion industry, right? That's more than mortgages, or actually that's right behind mortgages, excuse me. That's above consumer credit. That's more than people take out for their car loans, credit cards, whatever it may be. It's a big deal.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, they say, okay, well, student loans is the devil. Student loans is a curse. But for many of you all sitting there, for us, student loans is a gateway. We needed it to get through school, whether it's undergrad or even medical school and then eventually business school. We needed that. So it was that bitter pill that we had to take.
Yeah.
We knew that there's going to be we're going to have to pay, this debt up at some point.
Right.
We just didn't know when. We didn't have
Or
time
how.
to think about it.
Yeah.
Because we just had to get through school. We had to study and all those different things. We didn't have time to think about that. But that was really our gateway to not only a different career, but also a different station economically in our lives.
Exactly.
So as we say that, you want to say something?
No, I was going to say that, I'm looking at the chat and, Kareem says my brother calls himself rich in negative money.
Oh, yeah, that's what we called ourselves.
And Courtney says student loans equals an investment. Yeah, that's what that's what you see it as, right? Because you're investing in your education. Absolutely. And I also want to say happy birthday to Kevin Lai. I see that in the chat. Happy birthday, Kevin.
Birthday shout outs. Someone put the other birthday stuff in there. Well,
so the first question, I guess the first question that we have, because we know that you guys have to answer questions. So the first question that we had put out to you guys.
Do you want to get to the questions already?
Yeah. Let's just put out the first question at least, and then we can keep talking about it. Right. So the first question that we put out to you guys was, especially considering that we were talking about debt, is did you know what the average student loan debt was for your chosen profession before you ever started signing promissory notes?
Did you project it to them?
I'll project it while we're talking, yeah. But did you know what that was? So go ahead and put that in the chat if you knew what your average student loan debt was going to be before you ever, embarked on your journey. But yeah, did you know what yours was going to be?
No, I'll just leave it to you like this. I graduated from undergrad. I knew I graduated from undergrad with $25K in debt after 4 years. And then when I was filling out the paperwork for financial aid, that $25K was a proportion actually, of my first year student loans. And that's when I knew it was serious.
Yeah.
I was like, wait, it took me 4 years to accumulate $25K. And literally in a year, I'm going to more than likely double that. That's when I knew this was serious business.
Yeah.
And that is crazy. What are people putting down for their answer?
So let's see. We have Justine says yes for medical school, but all the MCAT prep was more expensive. Yes, than she expected. Christian, Sydney says yes. Christian says amount was too high to care. That was definitely me. I'm like, oh, it's going to be high. I don't care.
That's a good point.
Right? Let's see. Asma says sort of, but there are so many factors that are still going to play out. Yep. Veronica says more than a hefty mortgage for sure. Absolutely. Right. So, it's a lot of money, but I don't think even if you know the number that you can fathom, what that number means for you as as somebody who's going to have to pay that back.
Why don't you go ahead and show them what they're...
Okay.
Depending on what their career is.
So I got these numbers. I'm going to share the numbers on the screen if I can ever... Yeah, here we go. I'm going to share the numbers on the screen. So this is supposed to be the answer to the questions. But I got these numbers off the internet, so don't come after me if they're not like perfect. But considering that, you guys in this course... Oh. And here it is. Oh, it's the iPhone.
That's the other phone. Sorry, guys. Your phone might be going off also. But that's the government just testing out the broadcasting help system or something like that.
It worked. Everybody okay?
It worked.
So the government just made sure that we're okay. But considering all of you in the class are from, going into different professions, I projected on the screen. I'll just read off some of them. PharmD is 170. A pathologist assistant.
What the hell is even that?
I never heard of it.
Who out there is a pathologist assistant, and what is that? Did you ever hear that?
No.
I never heard that, but it's 132. Doctor of medicine, 220. We know a lot about that. Physical therapy, doctor of physical therapy, 116. The one that shocked me the most was doctor of podiatric medicine, which is $300K.
Very expensive.
Yeah, extremely expensive. So essentially that's just kind of some of them that are out there. But yeah, I mean, you guys are signing on the dotted line the same way we did and didn't really know what that was going to mean for the future for us, being in debt.
So we graduated in 2006. When are those numbers from?
That's like last week.
All right. So we graduated in 2006, and our combined debt, at least for me, which was undergrad, medical school, and business school, because I was crazy enough to get a DL MBA program.
Yes.
My debt was $240,000 leaving medical school. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty crazy. Like, did we just borrow way too much? Because from 2006 to now, you would think that it would still...
Yeah.
We were just...
But it's that MBA.
That's what
we added the MBA. And that probably added on, because I got an MBA as well when I was in medical school.
But you know what, though? Sometimes those numbers don't... Those are just medical school numbers.
Yes.
Right? Like, we have to really realize that ours was a combination.
A combined, right, medical school and undergrad. Yes, and MBA. Because
I when I think about it now, the thing that I remember is, like I said, remember when I said I signed that, when I applied, and that $25K was a proportion of how much I would need to take out for the entire year. Like, there's these promissory notes that we sign, and y'all know what I'm talking about. You guys may be doing it electronically now, but I remember, like, you had to hand sign these promissory notes, and then, like, every semester you would get a letter from either Sally Mae or whatever institution is giving you the student loans, and it would have like the terms of conditions. It would have, sometimes it will say that your student loan got sold to this agency, and I would just rip them up and just put them in like the back seat. Because
are you guys paying attention to that stuff?
At that point, like what someone said, it was so big. The loans were so big. It was just like,
you don't even care.
What am I going to do?
Right.
What am I going to do? Sometimes they were just like, hey, in order to get your transcript, sign this and get this loan.
Right.
So you're just like...
So you just sign.
Yeah.
There's a whole psychology behind it, right? So signing basically gives you access. So you just sign whatever you need to, not realizing that, there's some implications. But We eventually got married, right?
Here's where the loop goes, guys.
Right. We eventually got married after training. So we graduated in 2006. We went through training. We did forbearance. We did deferment. And for those of you who've never paid off, started your loan payoff, deferment basically means that the lender stops the payments and the interest keeps accruing, whereas forbearance means you just pay the interest, but the amount that you owe doesn't change. And so basically what that means is whether you forbear or you defer, you still owe a whole lot of money, and you're probably going to owe a lot more. And we did that for about another 5 to 6 years.
Yeah, there were moments where Sally Mae would call me as I'm getting ready to scrub into a case as a resident. And I said, I don't have enough money to pay. What do I need to do to get you off the phone? And they would say, well, you can forbear. Mm-hmm. And I did that, rinse, wash, and repeat literally for 5, almost even 6 years, actually.
Right.
And do you want to tell them what happened at the end, or should we go right into our salary?
Well, tell them what happened at the end, because someone says, Courtney says, you might as well add an extra $100K on it.
And that's what happened.
That's what we did.
That's what happened. So by the time I finished my training, which was a total of 6 years after 6 years after medical school. Right. My student loans had gone from $240,000 to $330,000.
Yeah.
And for you?
For me, it was the same. It was almost exactly the same, because when we looked at our loans combined after we got married, it was $662,000 worth of student loan debt, just student loan debt alone. And then you went and added to that debt by...
Hold on. It's not just me.
But you added majority of the debt, me. Come on.
All right, guys. So 2006, you guys are too young to understand it, but 2006, everybody was able to get a loan to get a house.
Everybody.
Anybody. I had no income. I put nothing down, and I got a townhome for $174,000.
Yeah.
So now you throw that on top of the already $662,000. So now we're at what? 7. I'm not good at math, which is why I got into debt.
Yeah.
So we're at $800,000 of student loan. Yeah. And then you did what? Yeah, now it's time to call you out.
Anyway, I started working as an independent contractor, didn't understand the taxes and things like that. And I ended up owing the IRS about $18,000.
Was that it? That was more than that.
That was it. It was $18,000. Don't try to play me. It was $18,000.
When I bailed you out, I thought it was
more
than
that. Get out of here. Anyway, moving on.
So anyway, guys, we were in it. We probably had realistically close to $850,000 of debt. Yeah. Had no clue how we were going to pay it off. We were at this point getting ready to have a 2-doctor physician household, but we were not expecting to be this far behind the gate, basically, so to speak. So what we decided to do was, how are we going to handle this debt? Mm-hmm. We didn't know how we were going to handle this debt, but we knew that Renee was going to be part-time as an OB, and then I was going to be full-time as a trauma surgeon. And very quickly, the reason why Renee made that decision was we spent a majority of our dating time in residency. She was in New Jersey and I was in Atlanta.
Just long distance. Mm-hmm.
Anybody who knows what a full-time OB doc does, that's almost like 2 times the work that I do as a trauma surgeon. So the concern was, well, if she's full-time and I'm full-time, we'll be like 2 ships kind of sailing in the night, always just saying, hi, bye.
Right.
She comes home and then it's time for me to go to work, and then vice versa. But the one thing that we decided to do is we decided to combine our debt. Yeah. Her debt became mine, my debt became hers. And then also we did the same thing with the salary.
Yeah.
It was no longer just her salary or my salary. We combined all of our salary.
Yeah.
And that made things, I think, a little bit more easier to handle the debt.
Right.
And as a result, what we decided to do, just to kind of speed up the story, is we lived off of Renee's part-time salary. All of our household expenses and how we lived were off of her part-time salary. Mm-hmm. And then we used my full-time salary. And then I also did moonlighting, right? So I did some extra work at other hospitals when I had some time off. We used all of my salary as well as the income from moonlighting, and we put that all towards the debt.
Now, but before that, the question that we had for you guys was, did you know what the average salary for your chosen profession was going to be? Because
I didn't.
We didn't.
I didn't know.
We had no clue, right? So we got to take a step back. in the story and say, like, we understood that we had a lot of debt, but we also thought, well, we'll just make a lot of money. And what does a lot of money mean? So the question that we have for you guys is, do you know what your salary, your average salary is for your chosen profession? Someone said lots of taxes.
Especially in light of all of those loans that you're taking out.
Right.
And when you're taking those loans and citing those promissory notes, did you know what your salary was going to be?
Yeah, because we didn't. And the funny thing is, in medical school, that can shift, right? Because I thought I was going to be a pediatrician. So even if I did go in thinking this is going to be my salary, the reality is by the end of medical school, I decided I didn't want to do pediatrics. I was going to go into OB instead. And so that salary is going to be different. Yeah. And so someone also asked in the chat, does that mean employed, right? Is, in terms of the salary, are we talking about employed? Yeah. And that makes a difference as well. Are you going to be employed? Are you going to work for yourself? Are you going to have a private practice, or do an independent contracting? So do you understand what your salary is going to be? And then for us, it was also a question of how do we manage that money?
And just so y'all know, like, we're still practicing at this point, but just let you guys know, like, this is how much money and decisions with money, even beyond salary, but what we're going to do and pay off our debt, this is how much it played a role in our lives. Mm-hmm. So when people tell you, yeah, you shouldn't worry about money, money will take care of itself, it's like, oh, you got another thing coming. Right? You always have to make a plan for that.
Right.
Okay. So, I wanted, when I'm envisioning talking to you guys, in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, have you guys ever heard of a doctor living paycheck to paycheck? Does that make sense to you all?
Does that make sense? A doctor living paycheck to paycheck? Because lots of doctors do.
You'll be very surprised to find out that a lot of doctors live paycheck to paycheck. Mm-hmm. And it's not just like anecdotal studies. Like this was put out by Forbes magazine a couple of years ago, where they found out a significant portion of doctors live paycheck to paycheck. What that means is they get a paycheck and they spend pretty much all of it during that pay cycle, whether it's every month or every 2 weeks. And then they make just enough to carry them on to the next pay period. Right. And then they just kind of do that for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, however long. Yeah. And it's really hard to build wealth savings that way. Yeah. So, it's a cycle that we kind of thought that we were going to get ourselves on. But I think once we combined our salaries and we really kind of put debt payment off, mm-hmm. or put debt payment really on our crosshairs, we were able to get off that off-ramp, so to speak. Yeah. And really start to get control of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so to answer that question of, how many or what percentage of healthcare workers find themselves living paycheck to paycheck, it's about 65%. Oh,
you found it?
Yeah, okay. It's about 65%, right? Which lets you know, right, that 65% is a majority, right? So if you think, well, this won't happen to me, the likelihood that it will happen to you is actually higher, considering it's 65%, which is scary.
So
right?
imagine me going to my mom and saying, "Hey, Mom, I know that my salary is like multiples of like your salary ever was, and I can get your salary in like 2 months, 3 months." But can you front me like $100 so I can make, like,
borrow $20?
How crazy is that? Yeah. But we've actually interviewed someone who was at that point, a doctor who was actually practicing. Yeah. We interviewed someone who was at that point.
Absolutely. And so that's a scary thought. But the reality is that it comes down to budgeting, right? And so the way that we got a real handle on our money and to be able to pay off our debt, which, by the way, we ended up paying off $662,000 in 3 years, was because we budgeted. And so we'll share with you at the end what we did in terms of budgeting, all the steps that we took to budget. But that was the key to really, really honing in on our financial stability. Otherwise, we would have been living paycheck to paycheck with a combined, salary of whatever and combined bank accounts where he's swiping, I'm swiping, and nobody's keeping track of who's swiping for how much.
The interest part, that compounding interest, I'm sure you guys have all heard of that, right? Mm-hmm. Loans have a certain interest component. I think Albert Einstein said like compounding interest is like the eighth wonder of the world, right? Like that's what got us into trouble, right? That got us into from $240,000 to $330,000.
Yeah.
But once we really started paying off the debt aggressively, that compounding rate really slowed down a lot. And we were able to really catch up and make some significant payments where, like you said, we're down to 3 years for, literally over close to $700,000 of debt. Now, the one thing that I do want to say is, and this is where we get into intentionality, right, is during that time where we're paying off our debt, we're also realizing a couple of things about ourselves. One, we started the podcast at this point, right? We're paying off debt, and a couple of years into us paying off debt, we start the podcast and we start realizing that this could be a business, right? And we really enjoy that, particularly me. I started the podcast off, I was the host initially by myself, and I just started realizing I love entrepreneurial aspects of that. Renee also started coaching pre-medical students into getting into medical school, right? So she made that into an entrepreneurial aspect. But then the other thing that we also enjoyed is that our medical careers, can we turn that around and make it more entrepreneurial also?
Right.
So what we once did as moonlighting became something that we did all the time. And we left becoming an employed model, right? We're no longer employed by the hospital. We're now literally like if a hospital were to hire a plumber or to hire any other vendor,
an independent contractor,
they would work with us the same way. These are things that we just started thinking to ourselves. We want to do medical mission work. We want to kind of live life on our own terms. And then ultimately we came to a point where we're like, look, I don't know if we want to practice into our 70s. I don't think we want to do that.
Exactly. And so that, that really gets us thinking into, well, exactly how long is your career going to be? And so when you think about retirement, what do you think?
What do you mean?
In terms of like, when you think about, okay, when I retire, I will be...
Like playing golf?
No, but what's your thought about the time at which you will retire?
The age, you mean?
The age, yeah.
Oh, I mean, I initially thought I'd be retiring at the normal age, in my mid-60s, maybe even into my 70s and so forth.
Right.
That's what I thought.
And that's what I think most people think, right? Is that you're going to retire into your 60s, right? And 65 is typically the number that we think of. But shortly afterwards, we started realizing that, wait a minute, retirement is not just an age. Retirement is actually a monetary figure, right? Which is why you see 80-year-old people who are still working because they literally cannot afford to retire. So
80 years old or 78 years old or even in your late 60s is really tough to wake up at 4 a.m. to take a spleen out. It's hard even at my age at 44. Imagine times 20. It's crazy.
Right. And so, when you're young, they say make your money when you're young and you're capable, right? When you're able to. And so when you're young, that's when you really want to start thinking about retirement. You don't want to start thinking about retirement, in your 40s and your 50s. You really want to start thinking about it in your 20s. And so, one of the things that you always say to residents about retirement, like when they're starting at their orientations.
Oh, it's always better to start when the stakes are low, right? When you're a resident, you're not going to be making as much money as when you graduate, right? And that's in whatever profession you are. So it's always good to start investing now.
Right.
Even if you make mistakes, it's better to start now because once you graduate and you start making bigger money, you're going to be more scared to make mistakes with the larger amount of money that you have. So it's better that you start and make mistakes with the lower amount. So that's why I always say start earlier, even if you make mistakes.
Yeah. And, think about it. You're able-bodied at that time, right? At 20 some odd years old or whatever.
Well, you may want to put in question, let them see a question about that. About retirement, right? So, I think we kind of answered that question is when do most health professionals actually retire? And that's usually between the age of 65 and 70 years old, right? So that kind of answers that question. But the other thing that you want to think about is in terms of being forced into retirement, right? So you could tell the story that, about one of the doctors that you interviewed, an orthopedic surgeon. Oh, yeah.
You interviewed.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was working with an orthopedic surgeon. Everybody loved him. Great guy. It was actually a shock to us that he was in his early 70s. But also at the same time, I'm calling him at 2 a.m. I have a compound fracture of a leg. And to anybody who doesn't, that's where it's broken and it's sticking out the skin. you need to come in now, right? Like that is tough to do that.
Yeah.
But also at the same time, in my mind, I'm like, why am I calling you in your 70s and it's 2 a.m? Like, aren't you tired of this?
Yeah.
Shouldn't you be playing golf? Shouldn't you be having boat drinks at this time?
Right.
You know, you start to think about like, why are you still working at this age?
Right.
You know, so.
Yeah.
If you're looking for a podcast that moves the health conversation outside of the box, then I highly recommend Healthy Conversations, the acclaimed podcast from CVS Health. Hosted by Dr. Daniel Kraft, the Harvard and Stanford-trained physician scientist, Healthy Conversations provides cutting-edge information about the forefront of medical practice. On each episode, Dr. Kraft sits down for one-on-one interviews with doctors and tech innovators who are transforming healthcare to address some of the most pressing issues. If you're looking for entrepreneurial inspiration, then I recommend their episode on how the NHS evolved to support physician entrepreneurs. This is where Dr. Kraft interviews Dr. Tony Young of England's National Health Service on medical innovation. Or listen to their recent conversation on neurodiversity with legendary animal behaviorist and autism advocate Temple Grandin. So look, don't miss out. Listen to Healthy Conversations from CVS Health. It's available for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to this podcast. Link is in the show notes.
Perfect. We'll take some questions in the chat.
What's a good resource to learn how to become a private contractor and the legality of working with a hospital as a contractor?
That's a great question, actually, right? So there's not much information out there to learn about that type of information, but me and Renee actually are creating content. We'll be releasing episodes about our transition from being employed doctors into becoming private independent contractors that work with hospitals and so forth. So we'll be releasing information about that. But ultimately, the key thing is to understand where they want to work, how they want to work, and also kind of understanding the concept of separating themselves, like what they do from a medical standpoint, from what they do from a financial standpoint.
Right.
And usually that is concerning, like, should I become an LLC and so forth? But we can supply some information about that afterwards where they can look that information up.
Yeah. And oftentimes, you know, people start kind of just with an agency, right? Looking up an agency that hires whatever profession you're in. Yeah. So if you're, you know, a PA or if you're a physician or whatever it is that you are, you may want to look into agencies that do temp work, for that kind of work. So
I just had a PA who was working at the hospital that I was working at. She was employed by there and she just really wasn't fulfilled. Yeah. Basically, and she was in a part of the state where she was really far away from her family, and she went to a locums company or an agency, and now she moved to Idaho, and she's really loving it. She's enjoying it, right? So she gets to travel,
right? And
she's working as an independent contractor.
Yeah. So Jack asks, if you're not an employee, what happens when you get sued? Who covers you?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
So depending on what you're practicing as, you're going to need medical malpractice, right? Definitely, if you're a physician, you're going to need medical malpractice. If you're a podiatrist, so forth, you're going to need some type of medical coverage.
Yeah.
The question comes down to who's going to cover that. Are you going to cover that, which can be reasonable? And if you're working as an independent contractor, that can become a business expense for you. Or is the hospital going to cover it for you? Most of the time, the hospital is going to cover it for you because it's just more economical for the hospital to add you on to the hundreds and maybe even thousands of medical professionals in that institution who already have medical malpractice. It's cheaper for them to do that. But you're definitely going to need medical malpractice, whatever situation it may be.
Yeah.
Never go without medical malpractice. Now, I've heard of some people in Florida going out there, but that's a very specific.
You have to show that you have so much in assets. Thomas asks, when did kids and starting a family come into the picture, and was debt ever a consideration in that process? Oh my God, if you know our story, you know the answer is absolutely. Debt was 100%.
Actually, debt probably would have played a role in us not having a family.
Right.
And that's seriously, like, that's the truth.
So we wanted to start having children right away after we got married. However, we ran into some infertility issues. So, you know, one of the things that happens when you're in these kinds of professions is a lot of times you're deferring right? You're deferring starting a family. And so your fertility potentially can decline. And so we ended up doing IVF for about 2.5 years while we were actually paying off our student loan debt. And we had made a pact that we would never create any more debt during that time. And so we actually were working and doing extra work and paying for the student loans as well as the IVF all at the same time. All in all, the IVF actually never worked. Our kids came spontaneously, which I want my money back, but that's not going to happen.
We're taking it out at 529. But basically what would happen is I was working where we lived, and then when I would do extra work, I would fly halfway across the country to do extra work. Well, what happens when the IVF fails and the doctor says, hey, you guys need to be together to do what? And it's like, well, he's halfway across the country. That's a failed cycle right there.
Yeah.
And that's about $20,000, almost $25,000 that's just gone.
Yeah.
Right?
It's tough. Yeah.
It's very tough.
Yeah. And so, I think Talia says, how are we supposed to afford to have kids? Yeah. I mean, it is tough. But again, understanding money management, right, is going to be extremely important. And not just from, when we talk about budgeting, we're not just talking about putting your money on a diet, right? We're talking about kind of just really making sure that you know where your money wants to go. But that also means understanding how to increase your income and understanding how money works to, potentially decrease taxes, basically get more bang out of your buck for money, right? Which is a totally different discussion, but one that we often talk about on our podcast.
Here's my advice, and this is what I tell everyone. Whatever career that you decide in health professions, you're literally going to be in the 1%, right? Of whatever it may be, whether it's knowledge, whether it's income, earning potential. In that situation, you can afford anything. Mm-hmm. The key thing is you can't afford everything.
Right.
So you will be able to pay off your student loans. You just have to be intentional about it.
Yeah.
You will be able to take care of your kids or develop a future for your kids or even for yourself. You just have to be intentional about it. The key thing is that they don't teach us this in school because there's just a lot of stuff. That's a lot of stuff in school. There's not much time. Mm-hmm. But I think overall now the landscape is changing. People are blogging about it. People are podcasting like we are about it. People are making YouTube channels about this stuff. So the information is getting out there. But trust me, you will be able to do it. It's just that you have to be very intentional. You have to think about it. And, to some extent, I think a lot of times because we're taught not to worry about money, when it's time to worry about money and we haven't practiced that muscle, we stick our heads in the sand, and then those problems get worse and worse, and they compound like what happened to us, right after medical school, and our, adding an additional $90,000 of interest to our student loan debt.
Yeah. Yeah. And let's take a couple more questions because we're rounding out to the end. Let's see. Nicholas asks, what is the best way for us to dismantle this system so the next generation of healthcare workers don't have to enter what is essentially indentured servitude? The answer is, I don't know.
There's no 100%. There's no panacea for this, right? We just recorded an episode before this, right? And we discussed what kind of change would you rather have in terms of the entire system, right? We know that the entire system needs to change in so many different aspects, from even from a mental health standpoint, from a sexism standpoint, anything that ends in an ism, there's some type of issue that's involved in there, and also from a financial standpoint. So we were discussing, is it better to see one big change that occurs, but it's going to take 20, 30 years to occur and nothing happens in between? Or is it better to have incremental change, very small incremental change over time?
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But I do know the reason why I started off this show by saying, hey guys, my legacy will be giving all the soft skills and the life advice that I didn't get is that's where I felt like my niche was at, and that's where I felt like I could change the narrative, so to speak, right? Whether to say no to someone, whether to purchase a house when you shouldn't really purchase a house, when you should start investing, what mistakes you should make, all the things that in essence, I didn't learn growing up, but play a major role in the specialty that I choose, where I practice, how long I'm going to practice.
Yep.
These are things that are really big and really important. And that's where I'm going to basically put a stake in the sand. And I think that you all, in some form or fashion, have to decide how you're going to change and what kind of change are you going to embody in order for the system to change.
Right. Exactly.
0 is greater than 1.
Yes, 0 is greater than 1.
1 is greater than 0.
Yeah. What? Well,
you know-
0 is greater than -1.
Stop it.
Now you know why I got into so much debt.
Let's see.
other
Asma.
questions do we have?
Asma asked, did we use financial advisors? The answer is yes,
Yeah, we use financial advisors.
but with a caveat.
We use financial advisors. We're now on our 3rd advisor. We made some mistakes early on where we kind of put our hand in the sand and we just kind of found anybody to help us manage.
Yeah.
There's an adage that says nobody's going to care about your money more than you,
Right.
which means that before you get a financial advisor, you're going to have to vet your financial advisor. And in order to vet your financial advisor, there's a lot of information out there nowadays where you can find
Right.
all the questions that you should ask them in terms of how they get paid, how they invest, speaking to maybe some of their other, speaking to their references that they may have, right? These are the things that you want to do before you take on a financial advisor.
Yeah.
So now we've been with our financial advisor for close to about 7 years. We love her. She's amazing. She saved our butts so many different times, including this year. But it's a very mutually beneficial experience for her as well as for us.
Yeah. Let's see. See how many more questions we can take. Brought up the 529. This is from Devin. You brought the 529. Can you talk about saving for your kids while paying off your own debt?
So likely everyone in this classroom is going to have a hard time with their kids getting financial aid just based off of the income that you're going to make.
Right.
It's the truth. So what you're going to have to do is, unless they are athletically gifted or gifted musically or gifted academically, you're going to have to start considering at an early age saving for them. The question is how do you save for them? So 529s are a really great way to save and invest for your kids using the principles of the stock market. Basically, every state has a 529. They've made it super easy for you to put money in, and then they will invest the money in. The majority of these 529s have something that's called a target fund, which basically is you look at the age at which your kid is going to go to school, and that fund you put your money in, and that fund will automatically over time start off as being very aggressive. And then as the kid gets into high school, it starts to become very what's the word I want to use? It becomes less volatile and more stable, so that there's any changes over the next 4 years, if the stock market crash, it's not going to really affect that 529.
Right.
But it's going to take time. It's going to take compounding. The same way our interest compounded over 6 years, it's the same concept with you putting money in and the compounding interest building on your child's 529 account.
Yeah.
But I definitely recommend it.
So I'm going to end here and I said I was going to share with you the steps that we took to basically budget and start managing our money. Hopefully that will give you more of a sense of what you need to do at least, or some steps that you can take in order to, start thinking about budgeting. And you can start. You don't have to wait until you graduate.
It's free advice, y'all.
Right? You don't have to wait until you graduate. I really wish someone would have told me that, I should start thinking about financial management while I was in medical school.
Well, I think a lot of people think that
easier.
it's when they hear the B word, budgeting, like,
yeah,
budget
it's like dieting
is
and
restricting
exercise
and all that stuff.
But
I found it to be very freeing. And I think once you go through the PDF, you'll see that it's very simple, easy, and it takes a lot of pressure off of you.
Yeah.
From those who do mental math, you know what I'm talking about, right?
I think I got enough money on
do
this
I got
card.
enough money to make it at the end of the month?
Declined.
So.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, but thank you so much for
no more questions?
Inviting us. Well, it's 1:20 their time.
Oh.
Or 1:50, me, their time.
Hey, guys.
So they have to go to another class.
This was fun.
Yeah.
I appreciate you all. We appreciate you all. Thank you for giving your time. I hope we were able to get some information out to you all. And listen, check us out at Docs Outside the Box on Apple Podcasts. Or check us out on YouTube at Docs Outside the Box. And we talk this all day, every day.
Yeah.
If you miss something, we talk about it all the time.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to get in contact with us. Just hit us up at hit us up at Docs Outside the Box podcast on Instagram.
Yes.
Yeah.
Docs Outside the Box on Instagram. Yes. Or you can just look up Docs Outside the Box podcast on YouTube, or you can find it on whatever place you like to listen to podcasts. Docs Outside the Box. Yeah.
Math and social media handles I don't do well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone.